One of the major issues in the Jewish community right now is the fact that the Conference of Presidents of major Jewish organizations, consisting of over 50 major Jewish groups, denied J Street membership in the organization. And lots of Jewish groups are upset about it, including, inexplicably, the Conservative Rabbi Group, the Rabbinical Assembly, the Reform Rabbis Group, which I expected. But to have conservative rabbis think that having J Street in this group was a good idea is beyond comprehension. Now, there are 600 rabbis on the J Street Board of Directors. There's J Street now in many college campuses. And the only thing I can think of is that, A, they just don't know what J Street really is. They're naive. Or B, they just haven't bothered. They're just liberals and moral narcissists, and they think if they feel good and they think it's everybody's happy and peaceful and everybody's the same, and if we're not making peace, it's our fault. Just naive moral narcissism. Or there are rabbis maybe aiding and abetting the enemy, because when you really find out what J Street is, you'll clearly understand. First, you got to know how they're funded. They tried to deny it at the beginning, but then the tax returns came out and people discovered that they got huge donations from George Soros, who blames Israel for everything. If you just look up what George Soros has said about Israel and Jews, now he is a Jew himself, a billionaire, and he funds the most radical, extreme leftist organizations. He's one of the major J Street funders. And then they traced money, a big, huge donation, to a lady who fronts for Iran. And there's other major Arab donors. This is supposed to be a pro-Israel organization funded heavily by viciously anti-Israel groups and Iran money and Arab money. They tried to deny it, as I said. They had a clumsy spin campaign when it was discovered, but you got to know who's funding them to understand what's really behind it. And so if you think about the positions they've taken, you'll see clearly they claim to be pro-peace and pro-Israel. They're neither pro-Israel nor pro-peace, because all they're going to do is create either a weakened Israel, a more dangerous Israel, or a destroyed Israel, God forbid. I happen to be taping this in the week in which we had Yom HaShoah, where 6 million Jews were brutally murdered. I think Jews should have learned once and for all that everybody's not a nice guy. Should have learned that from Jewish history. But it seems to be beyond the comprehension of these pro-J Street people. And then today we're commemorating Yom HaZikaron, the over 20,000 Jews who died defending Israel. So what is really behind this J Street thing? Well, first of all, the positions they've taken. Number one, they've consistently tried to raise money to support congressmen who are viciously anti-Israel. Some of the congressmen they've supported for election voted against Israel, where the votes were 411 to 2. And they're supporting these congressmen who take viciously anti-Israel positions. Number two, they invite supporters of the boycott, divest, and sanction movement to address their conferences. They never invite Israel supporters like Alan Dershowitz, but they invite these people openly hostile who want Israel to be undermined and weakened. I saw a film of the co-founder of J Street, Levy, who said, well, maybe Israel's a bad idea. If it'll only be supported by having a strong military, maybe it's a bad idea. That's the co-founder of J Street, thinks Israel might be a bad idea. Secretary of State Kerry just talked about how Israel, the apartheid country, which is the most ridiculous charge in the world. You think about the Arab countries that deny not only Jews, but non-Arabs and women and gays any kind of rights at all. They have black slaves in Africa, the Muslims, some Muslims, and Kerry talks about Israel might be an apartheid country, and every Jewish major group condemned him for that, except, of course, J Street never said a word. And then you think about when Israel withdrew completely from Gaza and said, here's an opportunity for the Palestinians to show what they can do, and all they got in return was 10,000 missiles aimed at defenseless Israelis. And the Goldstone report, this viciously anti-Israel report, came out, and J Street trumpeted that report, condemning Israel for trying to defend itself against these thousands of missiles coming from Gaza. Number six, if you find out where J Street started, this Jeremy Ben-Ami and this Levy guy, they actually were in Israel, and they tried to convince the Israeli public of their ridiculous positions, and they failed. So now, in the ultimate chutzpah, they go to America, and they try and say to America, To Obama, you should be pressuring Israel more to do things that Israel itself, the democracy of Israel, has concluded it's not in its own best interest. Israel's tried time and time again to negotiate with the Palestinians. They've offered all kinds of incentives and deals and land swaps, and they've given huge amounts of territory already for peace with Egypt and Jordan. And they've concluded there is no peaceful partner to negotiate with. They simply cannot trust the Palestinian Authority. And instead of recognizing the decision made by Israelis, these people have the chutzpah to think that they know better, and they're going to force America to try and force America to make Israel weaken. And they're trying to convince college campus kids who are young and naive and tend to say, oh, it's pro-peace, it must be good, that this is the right position. Just pathetic and disgusting. 7, Iran sanctions. Iran has been moving steadily closer, constantly, to a position of having nuclear weapons. They're open about wanting to destroy Israel. And the Senate and President Obama decided to take the pedal off the metal in sanctions, and the Senate was, and backed by major Jewish groups, was trying to force resolutions to demand that sanctions be maintained to pressure Iran to stop its nuclear program. And J Street lobbied against having those sanctions continued, aiding and abetting Iran, which wants to destroy Israel. I mean, it's unbelievable. And J Street's official position is that it's Israel's fault for the failure of the negotiations, that they blame it on the settlements. Well, I got one question for you. Was the settlements the reason in 1948 that 5 Arab armies went, and when the British pulled out and Israel was declared a state, they went to attack Israel? No, they wanted Israel gone. And if you bother to investigate Palestinian leaders who, to the Western press, make statements about accommodating Israel, but you see that they make plenty of statements saying, even if we ever make a deal, it's just a small phase in our struggle to get the ultimate aim, which is obviously Israel destroyed. And J Street doesn't pay any attention to this, doesn't support this at all. And they totally ignore the fact that Jews have lived in those territories for thousands of years. They're all discussed constantly in the Bible. And when Abbas and the Fatah say that no Jew will be able to stay in the land of Palestine, J Street doesn't say a word. Jews can live anywhere in the world except the one place where the Bible says they lived since the beginning of history, Jewish history. It's bizarre, but that's J Street's position. And then Hamas, which is recognized even by the United States as a terrorist group, which is control of Gaza now and moving more and more into control of the Judea and Samaria, they make a deal with Abbas just 2 weeks ago. They have a coalition agreement. So Fatah, which is supposed to be moderate, has now an agreement with this terrorist group Hamas. J Street does not condemn that deal at all. It's amazing. And then when Abbas says we will never ever accept there should be a Jewish state, J Street does not ever say one word about that. It's simply, by these positions, obvious that anybody can conclude it's a front group for weakening and trying to hurt Israel, and perhaps to fulfill the words of its co-founder, maybe Israel's a bad idea. So they can call themselves pro-peace, they can call themselves pro-Israel, but at the very best, they're naive fools who are going to just end up making peace more difficult and less close. And at the worst, they are a front group funded by Iran money and George Soros money and Arab money and anti-Israel money, with the evil designs of trying to destroy Israel. You know, everybody wants peace, and everybody wants a better world, and everybody wants the Messiah to come. But we've seen what imminent Messiah people have achieved. You know, the communism was supposed to be, let's bring Messiah now. And it was a complete failure, a catastrophe for the world. And that's exactly what is occurring with J Street. And so it's completely bizarre and horrible that these major rabbinic groups think that J Street should be included. They're very dangerous. They are misleading college kids. They are hurting the cause of Israel. And I think people should wake up to this fact and get on board and try and show why J Street needs to be completely marginalized and not encouraged and to be brought around the table.